My name is David Bender. I work for a little phone company called Flat Planet Phone. It's a lie up there. It says it's going to be on GitHub. I wasn't able to get it up there, so hopefully over the next few days I'll get it up there. But if you go there right now, it's just going to have my presentation from Asterisk World of last year. So how many people here, by raise of hands, work for a phone company or do a lot of international traffic? And how many of you have found it to be a pain to call outside of the country? Great. Well, then this talk is for you. So a little bit about the company. Was established in 2006. In the US, we primarily do hosted PBX, standard regular hosted PBX. We also do quality SIP trunking, and that's where most of the knowledge for the talk today came from. It's from dealing with the pain of all the carriers and trying to get phone calls to actually work. Part of a group of companies. We, like I said, Flat Planet originally started in the United States. Then we bought a small, the equivalent of a CLEC in Cyprus called Omega Telecom. We then went ahead and purchased a company in Israel, and we're branded the hosted PBX in the United States. It's called Newtel Systems. So when I first started, I was a young guy, knew the very basics of Asterisk, and I thought, great, I could do this. Go ahead, put a carrier into route, make a phone call, and it should just work. Apparently I was very naive, thinking that just setting everything up should automatically work. So what I want to cover today, the first thing is the gotchas, all the pains and all the aches that I learned the first day of job and all the problems, and then we'll go into termination, which is the bulk of what I'm going to talk about, making phone calls and the problems that we have. Small bit on origination, which is very important, because unlike termination where if you have a problem, you could always switch providers. When it comes to origination, if you stick with if you're with a provider and you have a problem and they have a problem, you're going to be in trouble, and then hopefully solutions to some of the problems. So what is the root of most of the problems that we found in making phone calls? Well, it's going to be two things. It's going to, one or two things, or sometimes both. It's going to either be incompetency, people that think they could go ahead and download free PBX and install it, and now voila, they're a phone company. And the other issue is going to be greed. That's where you have your fast, people going ahead and trying to cut corners and use, I'll bring up later, GSM gateways, or use less than reliable carriers, because if they could go ahead and shave off a couple of cents off the price on the phone call, but they'll save themselves some money, they'll do it. So pretty much every single slide that's going to be up here is going to be one or the other. It's either going to be incompetent stupidity or it's going to be greed, in my opinion. Gotchas. All right, so the first one is tier ones. They sometimes can be the worst. So everybody assumes if they're working for a tier one, don't name any names, but if you're going to be working with one of the big carriers and you're going to send them calls, well, they're really that big, they're a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and I send them a minute, it's going to worst. What we found is that tier one carriers generally have very good quality, but if they have a problem, there's nobody home and there's nobody to talk to. There's one tier one that we work with that we were told that if you don't spend less than $100,000 a month with them, it's not even worth it for them to talk with you. Your salesperson won't get back to you and they're not interested. If you start doing 100, 200, 300, $500,000, $1 million, and you have a problem and you threaten to pull your traffic, I see some nods, then all of a sudden they're going to be interested in talking to you. Another reason why, like I said, is you're too small, they just don't care. Another problem that we have is incompetency. We, as I brought up last year and the year before, we use a tool called VoIP Monitor. It logs and traces every single call, saves it to a PCAP, stores all the information in MySQL, so it gives you all the information about a phone call. And everything that we try to do by us is log as much details, as much information as I can about the call right now, because if I have a problem later, most of the tier ones want you to go ahead and reproduce the issue. Now, I'll bring up later something called audio repeat. We call audio repeats a problem that we're having with fraud. If you try to reproduce the issue, the fraudsters that are doing the fraud have written their algorithms in a way that you can't reproduce the issue, because they know if the tier one can reproduce it, they'll take that carrier out of routing. So tier ones, they're notorious that if you can't reproduce the issue and be scientific 100% of the time, you can't. So what we do is, like I said, we have VoIP Monitor. We're logging every single call to a PCAP. If we need to, we could go ahead and extract the audio from that to play it back. And we also have a graph of, and I'll show you in a bit of what it looks like, the audio signature of the file. We open up a ticket with this one particular tier one. A lot of my examples is with this one particular tier one. We send them a copy of the sound file. We send them a PCAP. We send them everything possible to show exactly where the problem is. Every single packet going from us to them for this particular call, every single packet from them coming back to us, and then we get a generic response, no, it's not a problem, we tried to, our ASR, average success rate, average call duration is good. Well, if you have a problem and there's somebody doing fraud, and only 10% of the calls are working, but 10%, that number is your baseline, and it looks good to you, they're not going to work on it. They also always take forever to work, whereas when you work with smaller companies, if there's a problem, they're hungry for your business, so they'll work harder to make it work. And then the other issue is that you have a lot of companies where tier 1 engineer will see a problem, recognize it, think there's a problem, but they don't have the permission to go ahead and make the changes. I know in our company, we train even the basic techs. If we're confident in them that they see a problem and they could identify the problem and they know there is a problem, go ahead and make the change, let us know. If we think that it's going to cost us too much money or it's going to be a problem, we're going to run out of minutes, we'll deal with it. But I'd rather, even if I'm going to lose money now, keep the customer happy, make the call work, than have the customer not be able to make calls and then go over to the competition. Another real quick about this same particular carrier with incompetence, we were sending them calls. The called person picked up the call. They didn't send us the message saying that the call was answered. The way it works is when you send it to your provider, Verizon, AT&T, whoever you're using, and they pass it to their carrier, et cetera, until it gets to the end side when the, sorry, apparently coming down with something. That's almost a party here too much. When you send the call and it gets to the other side, and they pick up the phone, it's supposed to pass a message that it was answered. For some reason, they never passed that message. Then they rejected the call, so we went ahead and passed it to another carrier. As far as the user's concerned, they picked up the phone, they're making a phone call, and all of a sudden the call gets disconnected. SIP versus TDM. That seems fairly obvious that you'd want to use the latest and the greatest, and I normally would say, yes, definitely hop on and use SIP when you can. TDM is old. But on the other hand, if you're using specific cases, for instance, faxing, I know this T38, and it's supposed to work perfectly fine. Unfortunately, it doesn't. If you have a mission-critical app that's, for instance, that's doing mission-critical, and let's say faxing, we found that there is nothing that can replace TDM. TDM is time-tested. It's been out there for God knows how long, and it just works. And that's one of the pluses and minuses about SIP, that it's so easy to set up that, again, everybody thinks they could be a carrier, and they could set up a system. You also have interesting carriers that will go ahead and make problems in port 5060. I read reports that Verizon Wireless was blocking port 5060. I'm not sure why, what their official reason is, but we could always, assume why SIP is not going to work on a cellular network. And the last thing is, especially if you're a phone company, when users complain, in the beginning when I first started, whenever a user complained, we instantly went ahead, changed the route, changed the provider we were working with, because if the user complained that there was a problem, then there probably is a problem. So we've trained our users fairly well at this point that when most of them open up a ticket, it probably is a problem, but we've had issues where it was simply salespeople that couldn't make a sale, but they didn't want to look bad, so they blamed it on the phone company because it's easier to blame me than to blame their own incompetence. We've had problems where they got an inbound message and it said the line is busy, and they opened up a ticket, it says the line is busy, but I want to get through. Short of getting on a plane, flying to that specific country, knocking on the person's door and saying, why aren't you picking up the phone? My customer wants to harass you and sell you something. I really can't do anything about it. And another thing that we found is we have customers, we have a lot of call centers that make a lot of phone calls and they end up a lot of naughty lists. For instance, there's the crowdsource app called Truecaller, that if too many people get spam phone calls, too many people get phone calls that they don't want, when they hang up the phone, they'll mark it in the app as spam. And if that number calls enough people and ends up on this list and enough people tag it, then everybody's going to start rejecting it. I'm sorry if you're not following the local do not call lists, or you're not respecting the people's wishes that you're calling, and you're calling them anyways, but if they don't want to pick up the phone, there really isn't anything that I could do to force them. It's in my interest to pick up the call, because if they don't, I'm not making money. But again, I'm not going to break any laws or play any games to make your call work because you're spamming people. All right, caller ID. When I say caller ID, we're talking here now about termination, about making a call. So at the wholesale level, most carriers will allow you to send whatever caller ID you want to send. Most of them trust you that if you're going to set the caller ID to a specific number, that you own that number. It's 2017, you would think it would work. So again, we had one specific tier 1 carrier, which we had to go through all the testing and turn up, and it was a week worth of testing of PCAPs and traces and doing this call and that call. Because the office that was testing it is here in the United States, we tested all the calls locally. Caller ID worked. Everything worked perfectly fine. So we went ahead and put them en route. We sent calls to France. Not an hour later, we got a ticket from a customer. I'm calling France, and it's showing up as blocked. So I said, oops, must have not tested something. There must be something wrong. I opened up a ticket with them, and if I said the name of the tier 1, everybody I'm assuming in this room, I'm pretty sure heard of them. The response back was, we don't support caller ID internationally. This is 3 years ago. It's not 2007, 2014, but still. There's no reason why caller ID should not work. We had another carrier where we were sending calls to Russia, and a carrier gave us a very good rate. It was competitive. It was within the ballpark of the other providers that we were using. We started sending calls. They promised us, yes, caller ID, it works, everything is going to be perfectly fine. Same complaint. I opened up a ticket. The response from the carrier was, well, at this rate, you should know we're using gray routes. You should know we can't guarantee caller ID. It's assumed. And I said, well, I have other carriers that are giving me the quality. They're giving me caller ID, and I promptly yanked them out of my system. And interesting enough, I got an email this morning from them saying, what's your target price? And the answer was, do you not recall the last conversation we had? You're no longer in my switch. Oh, no, become more competitive. I think I could offer you caller ID. I haven't gotten back to them yet. The next thing is regulation. Like I said, we do a lot of, big part of what we do is outbound traffic. So we buy phone numbers from a number of vendors. For instance, we use Voxbone, and they get us numbers in Turkey. So we have people that have call centers all over. They'll have a call center in Israel, they'll have a call center in Cyprus. And when they call countries such as Turkey, they want to be able to present the local caller ID. So the odds of the person I'm calling picking up, if they see a number from Cyprus or a number from inside their country, they're going to pick it up. We magically started having problems where we started noticing PDD of up to a minute before calls started working. So we started fishing, we started working on it, and it turns out the regulators in Turkey are very, very strict. And if you try to send a call to Turkey with Turkish caller ID from outside of the country, they won't let it through. They're very strict, they're very tough. They have, from what I understand, that at any time could go ahead and go to any operator inside Turkey and say, show me your logs, show me the IPs. Not only that, if you use a virtual server in Turkey and try to send your calls to that virtual server on Asterisk and then send it to a provider, if they see it's from a hosting provider, especially a VPS provider, they're going to be suspect to regulator, and they're going to dig and see where the calls are coming from. So we just simply told customers we couldn't do that. Another provider in Japan called Documo, where they had a lot of fraud in the beginning. Caller ID was working, and then one day they just shut us down, and they said in Japan there was a lot of fraud. People were spoofing caller ID, so we can't send local caller ID either. I'll touch up on Europe in a bit, how the landscape there changed with caller ID and pricing. And then you have, as I alluded to earlier, gray routes, where people will go ahead and they'll play games with traffic. For instance, like I said, in Israel, we're a provider, we're interconnected directly with all the mobile carriers there, and the wholesale rate that we have to pay the end mobile provider where we're sending the traffic to is, I think, 1.75 cents a minute. We've been approached by people that have GSM gateways, because you don't know, what people will do is they have unlimited SIMs for about $10 a month. So at 1.7 cents a minute, if I'm able to push more than 500 minutes on a SIM, I'm making money. So what these guys do is they'll go ahead, put a DSL line in their house, hook up a 32 bank gateway. Hopefully they'll on average push up more than 500 minutes per GSM chip, and now they're making money. It's tempting for us to go ahead and send them traffic. Of course, we have to block the caller ID because we don't want the people making the calls from outside of the country knowing, what we're doing, and it would make problems so we don't do it, but it's very, very tempting to go ahead and use one of these services to save some money. Never mind the fact that you're using somebody's DSL connection in their house, so you're gonna have quality problems there as well. Next, for incoming, and I'm gonna touch on this in a bit, you should not have issues. However, a lot of times you will, and in that case, it's beyond your provider's control. The provider, like I mentioned, Voxbone, they have on their website where they will support caller ID from the country where the number is. So if you have a number from Belgium and a call is coming from within Belgium, the caller ID will work. If it's coming from outside of the country, they don't guarantee. And the reason why they don't guarantee is for the reasons that I explained earlier with termination with making phone calls. They have no idea how that call is landing in that local country. I'm sure most of us have the experience from the countries that we're from in that country. Any local provider, you won't have problems because you really can't play shenanigans, usually in that local country, unless you're going to send the traffic out and come back in. Generally, the quality in the US, your traffic's going to be good to the US. But if you try to send it overseas, if you're using some no-name carrier or the tier ones, usually anything in between is okay, you're going to have a problem. So it should work, but you can't be guaranteed, and unfortunately, it's not your provider's fault if you have a problem. We had a problem with our, not caller ID, but we had a problem in general with incoming, with our Cypriot numbers, where we had customers in Russia, we had customers that had customers in Russia that were complaining that their calls weren't coming in. So automatically what we do is we check connectivity between all the other carriers in Cyprus. We verified that all the calls are coming in, everything is working. And once that is working, I have no way of knowing how that call is coming into Cyprus. I have no way of knowing the carrier in Russia, who they were using, and unfortunately I don't want to do this to my customers because we're the phone company, we're supposed to make it work, and we try to contact people in Russia to make phone calls, but more than that I can't do because I have no control of how the call gets to the country. Once it's in the country, once it's with all the providers, I have power to go to the regulators. We had problems in the past, and nothing gets done until you send an email to the carrier, CC the regulator, and the match go, no, it's going to be taken care of, and within 24 hours the problems are fixed. Next, source-based routing, and this has been big lately in the EEA, European Economic Area. Now I say EEA and not the EU because the next one up, you see Switzerland is not in the EEA. So the regulators in Europe are trying to find ways to lower the costs inside the countries that are inside the EEA to get cheaper rates to make it cheaper. So they passed regulations saying it used to be that first it started off with the roaming. So if you had a French SIM and you went to the Netherlands, they couldn't rip you off. They couldn't charge you those grotesque prices that they were charging, you know, back in the day, $1 a minute, $2 a minute when you were roaming. They had to lower the prices. The next thing the regulator said was, well, we want there to be inter-EEA commerce. We want people to call, we want people to talk, but we don't want it to be expensive. Hey, carriers, if you're calling with inside the EEA, you have to lower the rate. Well, they had to comply, they had to do it, but now they had a problem. Now they're losing a lot of money. I know, we'll go ahead and screw everybody else. So we were sending calls to Italy, we were paying a couple of cents a minute, everything was fine, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, one carrier popped up, and the price went up by about 10 cents a minute. We had no idea what happened, because I said it wasn't in Cyprus yet, it was just in Italy. We had no idea what happened. We started going around, we saw everybody started raising their rates. And then slowly but surely, any carrier that was pretty much located in the EU, all of a sudden their prices started going up, sometimes 20-fold, where it was costing us 2, 3, 4 cents a minute. All of a sudden, sometimes it was costing us 20, 25 cents a minute. So we did some more digging. We found some local carriers. We found out this was because of the regulation. So we had an idea. We have a lot of our customers that are located, like I said, in Europe and Cyprus, and they're using EU caller ID. They're using EEA caller ID. So there's no reason why we can't display that as opposed to displaying a US phone number if the customer owns that number. So we started doing that, and everything was fine. Well, the problem was is that Switzerland had a problem with this because the Swiss carriers, because they're not in the EEA, and the countries in the EEA are trying to maximize their revenue, any calls that were coming from Switzerland all of a sudden started costing a lot of money. Carriers in Switzerland were not happy about this. They said to the countries in the EEA, no problem, now when you try to call us, we're going to charge you more money. So as a carrier, or a US company, as a carrier that's not located in any of these countries, our wholesale rate, and I would like to believe we have good rates sometimes to Switzerland in the beginning till the market stabilized when it was in excess of 90 cents a minute to call certain mobile providers. Some carriers will charge you a surcharge if the caller ID is not European, EEA. Others will just charge you across the top. And lastly, not all carriers follow the same pricing routes and rules. The same tier 1 that I spoke about earlier has a structured pricing. So if you're calling Italy and you're calling a specific carrier in Italy and you're calling from say, Belgium, there's one price. If you're calling from the US with US caller ID, there's another price. If you're going and calling from the UK, there's a third price. So the pricing is all over the place, and it becomes very, very hard to manage. So when you get your route sheets from the carriers, look at them and be careful you know what you're looking at, because one wrong mistake and you could lose a lot of money. Next, we could have some large routing differences between different providers. Tier 1s, again, could be the worst. Some of the reasons why there could be differences is they're lazy. They didn't get to manage updating it. You'll have the GSM gateways. You'll have people that'll go ahead and have niche routes for a little bit. Don't ask me what this is, but they had this thing called the kosher phone, where they were trying to sell services where you couldn't call any of the naughty numbers and any of the prohibited stuff. And all the carriers in Israel were trying to fight for the market, so they made it that between these prefixes, the pricing was a lot cheaper. So then, of course, they introduced people using the gateways, and then some carriers had these en route. Other carriers did not have this en route. Next, you have some carriers that will go ahead and do LRM-based billing. So usually with inside your country, like in the United States, just if you're going ahead and you're calling 917, which is in New York, let me just think, for instance, where I live in Jersey, 732-367 is the ARPIC as Verizon. If you look at your rate sheet, you see for 1732367, you're paying a certain amount of money. But if that number now goes ahead and gets ported over to, say a carrier called Peerless, you're actually paying based on the LRM price. You're not necessarily going to be paying based on the actual prefix. So it's with the provider that you're paying the price with the number where the provider is. When you're sending internationally, most carriers will just bill you based on the prefix. So for in Italy, I looked it up. The prefix 39 is Italy, 3756 is a carrier called Fastweb. They're one of the main carriers there from what I understand, and the rates there are fairly cheap, and it costs a couple of cents a minute to terminate the call. If you port that number over to a carrier called ITA, when I look in my routing table for my providers, unless I have access to the local number portability inside Italy where I'm sending the calls to, I'm going to bill it, and I'm going to say my cost is 3 cents a minute, charge 5 cents a minute, and I think I'm making money, but really the carrier ITA is charging wholesale rate of 20 cents a minute, so in reality I'm losing 15 cents a minute. So again, with this particular tier 1 that it happened with, we said, well, it's probably going to average out, we're not going to lose a lot of money, but then when we went ahead and looked at the bill, we noticed customers were exploiting this. They realized, I guess, where they were calling what the rates really were. We ended up getting lit up, so we ended up going with carriers that just simply charge us, well, most of the time, where they're going to charge us based on just the route and not actually the prefix, and let them lose the money because I want to know what I'm making and what I'm losing, and I'm not interested in having, insight into portability. And especially in a lot of countries, there's a lot of regulation about who could and who can't see it. And I had one carrier that came to us that wanted it for Cyprus. We looked into it, we found out we weren't allowed to give it to them. I'm not sure who he got it from, and I'm not sure whose back door he's going to get the information. But this particular company sort of let me know that he knew what he was doing was wrong, but there was big enough of a business because people were using carriers that were billing them based on what they were calling. Last but not least, and this is very, very, very important, customers will try to exploit this. Somebody know that bills soft switches, and they got a route update from their provider, so they had a country, it was in South America, I forgot which country it was, where a new mobile prefix was introduced. The carrier sent them the rate update. They waited a couple of days. I guess their policy was they only updated it once a week. One of their customers noticed that they didn't go ahead and they didn't update their routing table, so it was being billed as a landline, and in a matter of a couple of days, they lost $80,000 because the customer decided to exploit this. And they told the customer what the rate was. They couldn't go ahead. I mean, the customer knew what they were doing was wrong, but if they're going to charge them a cheaper rate, they're going to go ahead and exploit it. So you have to be very careful that if you are doing billing based, if you're doing a lot of international, that you're constantly watching what your cost is, what you think your cost is, and what you're charging. And another good thing to do is to actually go ahead and connect to your carriers, download the CDRs from them, compare it to what you have in your system, what you think your cost is, and double check and make sure that there's no oopsies. I found this morning a case where one of my guys put in a rate to Turkey at 1.9 cents and ended up being, it was 19 cents a minute, and he just messed up the Excel column when he was updating it, and I happened to found it by accident because I was looking at a report and it didn't make sense that everybody else is charging between 15 and 20 cents a minute, and we have one carrier that's charging us 1.9 cents a minute. And we just looked a bit deeper and then whoops, and it was actually for a bunch of destinations where he messed up and was sending the wrong prices. All right, the cheapest is not always the best. So everybody, obviously we're here to make money, here to buy low and sell high. So when we started, we had one particular carrier that wanted to be aggressive, that wanted to go ahead and wanted to give us good rates. We were very excited. We put them first en route, started sending them calls, and we noticed that the ASR was very, 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 very low. Sometimes, for some reason, it took them time to reject the call, so we had high PDD. Sometimes we gave pricing based on the first carrier en route, because you assume that usually your first carrier route is going to take your calls if they're having some kind of issue, if there's some kind of problem. It's going to then go ahead and fail over to the secondary carrier, but you're assuming it's going to go to that carrier. Open up tickets with them saying, why would you have such low ASR? And almost every single time we opened up a ticket, the answer always was, oh, it's a commercial issue. So they went ahead and promised us great rates to be the first one en route, and then cherry picked and only took where they were making money. And it made, like I said, it made us problems. We had high PDD. The pricing we were giving out was based on what this carrier promised us, but they weren't able to deliver. The next problem that you have is that when you request better rates and you go ahead and you really squeeze your carriers, at some point they're going to have to bust. At some point they're going to have to treat quality, even though they'll promise you and say they're not changing quality, they're going to have to do it. We had a new guy that came on that was given the title of route manager. It used to be us engineers, and engineers, we don't care about money, we care about quality, we want the customers to be happy. So, well, yeah, we care about the company's money, but we want less support tickets, less headaches, everything's working for them, we're happy. Well, this guy wanted obviously to save as much money as possible, went over to one of our providers, really squeezed them, negotiated very good rates. I was impressed with his skills, couldn't figure out how he got such good rates until we started seeing the support tickets coming in. It got so bad that 95% of the time when we had specific tickets coming in with specific quality issues, delays, no ringing, one-way audio, breaking up, jitter, and a list of problems that we had, if we could automatically name this carrier and we knew that it was this carrier that was en route, and when they went ahead and said to us that they went ahead and they fixed the problem, sometimes yeah, sometimes not. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work. So when you're negotiating rates, make sure that you're getting the same quality. Make sure that what they say they're giving you, they're actually giving you. And last but not least is alternate endpoints. I'm sure most of you, yes?
Have you figured out any way to detect arbitrage and identify the real carriers involved in the resale?
Not really, because they'll never go ahead and tell you who they're using in fear of you going and talking, not unless you have somebody on the other side and you're friends with the carrier in the other country, and you could try to figure out who's handing them the call. For some reason, everybody holds it close to their chest who they're using. They don't want to give up and say who they're using. So usually very hard to figure out who they're behind. We put a lot of pressure, like we had, I'll speak about in a minute, in the fraud. We try to push really hard to find out who it is, just simply because we want to, knock it down, want to get rid of it, because it's, I care that they're doing fraud, but I care more about getting rid of these carriers and pulling them out of route because they're making problems, and they will not give up who they're using. Very few carriers will tell you who they're using. In the US, it's more because most companies like handing off media directly, so you can just do a who is on the IP, but international, pretty much everybody proxies media, and nobody will tell you who they're using.
One way we found so far is if we don't send the call ID and we have a friendly recipient on the call who will report the CID, we can do a reverse.
Interesting. Then they're all interested in complying.
Build a bit of a map.
But the problem is a lot of carriers, if you don't, like the big tier ones, Verizon, Bix, BT, if you don't send caller ID, they will flat out reject the call. They won't even take the call. So when customers don't send us caller ID, we have to put in one of our main DIDs we have set aside for caller ID, and then we're just in the privacy hidden. But you actually cannot send, they will flat out reject the call. They will not take the call if you're not sending them caller ID. But that's an interesting idea if you send it blocked and have them put in a complaint, well, no, technically you could probably spoof the caller ID and then have them complain about the spoofing and then work backwards. It's a good idea. Write it down, thank you. So the other problem is the app Viber. They position themselves in the market to where they have a lot of users. And I know firsthand what they're doing is now, they're going over to phone companies and they're saying, you're calling Saudi Arabia, which the wholesale rate, 10, 12 cents a minute, we're going to undercut the carrier, send us a call directly, it's on net, send us the phone call. If it's a Viber customer and the phone is on, we'll deliver it directly to our software. You'll pay less than you're paying the PSTN. We'll make money, you'll save money, and everybody will be happy. Well, that works very well for Viber, and that works well for a lot of carriers, maybe calling card traffic. But when you have call centers and you have businesses that try to look legit, that want to do business, when you show up on a Viber app and the caller ID may come through, may not come through, and the quality is not good because they're running on 3G instead of the call coming in through the PSTN, our customers look stupid. Our customers would rather a call cost them $20 instead of costing them $5, but then they go ahead and make that $10,000 deal as opposed to saving $15 on a phone call, have it choppy, and then they lose out on a $10,000 trade. So we don't want to compromise. And then all the carriers, it's very taboo whenever you speak of Viber, oh no, we don't have them en route. But yet we still every so often get the complaints, and then as soon as you open up a ticket, oh, that shouldn't be there. But if you don't work with Viber, how is that call getting onto their network? So I know for a fact that they are going around there. So they approached us to get us to send them calls, and we told them where to go. Next we have is fraud. I could write a book on the fraud and the problems that we had with it. You have your classic fraud. There's been a lot of talks, I think, on Thursday, somebody from CG Rates is talking about it. You could go on YouTube and look at previous talks. There's been a lot of talks on fraud and the different ways to mitigate it, the different ways to track it, and to see where it is. Then you have the classical fraud, which is a customer's extension is going to get compromised. Don't ever use extension 100, password 100, because that's the first thing that they're going out and they're looking for. Don't go ahead and take a Polycom SNOM EA link and put it on the public, give it a public IP or a NAT hole open, default username and password, and let them get through. In my opinion, web interfaces on phones should be disabled by default. Unless you need to troubleshoot and you need to do something, there's no reason to leave it open. But there's a lot that could be said on fraud. So you have the default fraud where customers get compromised. I have one customer, well, I'm gonna say weird, but I have one customer which loves setting up devices and just simply forgets to change the password on his ground streams away from admin. And at least once every other month, they're getting hit, and we shut them down, and they get angry that we shut them down. So we said to them recently, we'll leave you open, but then when you get a $10,000 bill, don't complain to us. And actually that is a problem, because even if, let's say, we're charging customers full rate on fraud, we only have so much credit with our provider. So even if, let's say, I have a $10,000 credit line with a provider, if a customer decides to be stupid and burn through my $10,000 credit, even if I made $5,000 on that, and yay, I made $5 grand, I'm very happy, what about all my other customers that I'm relying on this provider to send the calls out? And now I'm down a provider that I knew had a very good quality to a specific country, and now I can't go ahead and call that country because I just burned through all that money that happened to us once. So we have limits across our platform where if you speak more than a certain amount of money, we shut you down. We could always open you up. We could always open things up, and we have also, before we shut them down, we have alerts. So we have a daily limit where you're allowed to speak. If you hit 50%, we're going to get an email and we're going to contact you. If it's not fraud, we're going to increase that so we don't keep getting annoyed with emails. But if I can get a hold of you and I look at the traffic profile and I think you've been hit and there's nobody to talk to, you're going to get shut down, because I'm not going to have all my customers suffer because of your incompetence, because you're an idiot. Like I said, there's a lot that you could read up on. There's a lot of talks from last year on fraud, but it's a really big problem. Sorry, the next thing that you have is also fraud. You have is fast, false answer supervision, as I mentioned earlier. When you go ahead and make a phone call, so you send it to your carrier, they send it to their carrier until it gets to the end carrier.
What was that?
FAS, false answer supervision. So it's called answer supervision. That when in SIP it's a 200 OK. When you go ahead and you send the phone call, so you'll send it to your carrier, they'll send it to their carrier, yada, 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 until it gets to the endpoint. When the end person picks up the phone and answers, in SIP it sends a 200 OK, your carrier gets told, that's how they know it, go ahead and start billing you to their customer till it goes all the way back. So every so often, with one of these really cheap carriers, what they'll do is they'll go ahead and they will, sometimes we found, like, it was originally the carrier that was cherry picking, every so often, numbers, what happened was we get rejected with the first carrier because it was an invalid number, get rejected with the second carrier because it was an invalid number, roll over to the third carrier, and magically they were answering all the calls and they were going nowhere. So the person calling is yelling, hello, 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 the timer on their phone started, so they're actually thinking they're talking to somebody, but there's nobody there. There's another form of fast where they'll go ahead and answer the call and then connect it, or they'll play a bit of ringing and then they'll connect it. So they're starting to charge you, and it may not be your provider, it may be a provider's provider. You have no way of knowing how far up it goes, but they're going to go ahead and they're going to make you problems. Last but not least is audio looping. It's fairly new. It's been a little over a year. It's been going on. It was in my slide last year. So this started out, and show you what it looks like. This started out about a year and a half ago to Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, where what happened is that when you have a phone call, so I say hello, you pick up the phone, you say hello, they record that the first 2-3 seconds, and you can see that over here. You can see that's the part that's going to looping over there. And what they do is you speak, so the salesperson, this is the A leg, this is our customer, they're doing their spiel. Here the person that they're called is saying, and they're doing their entire talk. And then I guess what the fraudsters are doing is they're detecting that there's a silence coming from their side. What they do is they then disconnect on the second leg, so they're no longer completing the call, they're no longer paying for the call, and then what they do is the audio that they recorded in the beginning of the phone call or a couple of seconds in, because you can see over here that's the first real answer, that's the ringing, that's the phone going off hook, and that's the first person saying hello. I would love to play it back, but we don't have permission to play it back. That's them saying hello. They disconnect the call. You can see it's pretty clean over there. They disconnect the call. They play the person saying hello. You think that there's a quality problem with the line. So in the beginning what happened was the customers would go ahead and go into their whole spiel and start doing their sales pitch again, thinking that there's a temporary problem, and they're going to go ahead and start talking again. It became a big problem. We're working very hard. We still don't have a fully baked solution, but we're working on it. We're actually working with the guys from VoIP Monitor and a couple other smart people to try to write software, because VoIP Monitor is capturing all our calls anyways. That's where this came from, to find this fraud. And recently this problem popped up in Germany. We're using a tier 1 in the EU, sending calls to Germany, and this attests again to the tier 1s. I'm not sure who they're using, but they're definitely not using the standard SS7 links that they would be using, because they're having this audio problem as well. So you may come across it. It is a real pain, and unfortunately right now the only option is to have a ring of carriers that you know should be good, and when customers complain, you move it. Like I said, we're working on a software solution so that we could detect this problem before the customers do, so we could go ahead and change it before they complain. Some of the problems that we have with origination, I'll try to speed it up, I'm almost running out of time. Sort of the same problems you have with origination. Go on, sorry.
Where's the fraud at?
The fraud over here. What? It's somebody in the middle. It may not be my carrier, because I'm using the tier 1s. Verizon's not going to go ahead and do such a thing. BT is not going to do that, but whoever they're sending the call to, and I don't get this, because if they kept the call up, and my call is 30 minutes, they're going to make a lot more money in that. I don't get it. But if it's calling card traffic, where the calls are small duration anyways, and the average call is, say, a minute, and now they could take that minute and turn it to 2 minutes, they're making money. My specific profile, they're losing money, because most of my calls, my sales calls, we have a low ASR, but once that call gets through, I sometimes have phone calls that could be a half hour, an hour, and the call for the customer could sometimes be $50, $60 for a phone call. So yeah, for my customers, they're losing money. But I guess overall, they think they're making money, right? Coming off the nose in spite of their face. I don't understand either why they're doing it. And the fact that it's affecting all the tier 1s is not just one. It's affecting, well, Bix, BT, Verizon, Net2Phone, everybody that we could possibly think of sending calls to, they all come across this problem. We'll have one carrier, pull them out, use somebody else, and it's just a circle till it comes back around. And usually they both don't have the problem at the same time. I don't understand why they're doing it either. It makes no sense. It makes sense to somebody because they're doing it. So same problems with origination. With origination, I mean phone numbers. In a lot of countries, it can be very, very heavily regulated. For instance, in Italy, it used to be till now, when we got numbers from a carrier, we just had to go ahead and provide them an address. Well, there's been a lot of fraud, a lot of people giving, and we've caught customers giving addresses to hotels to people try to get a number, because a lot of these, sorry, I'll help you real fast, a lot of these countries, if you like in Italy, if you want a number and you want a number in Milan, you have to actually have an address in Milan. So they just changed the regulation in Italy to where if you want a phone number inside a specific town, you actually have to provide photo ID showing that you live there, otherwise they won't go ahead and give you the number. In Germany, in a lot of other countries it worked where you could use Regis, like a virtual address. In Germany, if you try to get a German number and you don't have a local address, so if you give them paperwork showing you have mail going to a Regis address, to have, I'm assuming, a list of all the virtual offices, they won't accept that. So if you have a carrier that's going to magically give you a number where nobody else can give you a number, think about that. How are they getting that number? Is it a T1 coming to somebody's basement and then tomorrow it's going to get cut off? We have one particular provider that actually has listed on their site for certain phone numbers, no SLA, not suitable for published media. What does that mean, not suitable for published media? Don't put this number on your website, because it may work today, but it'll be dead tomorrow. And we've had a couple of times, we actually had a problem, just got an email a few days ago for Saudi Arabia with this particular carrier. Numbers were working for over a year, and then all of a sudden they stopped working, and then, well, yeah, you should have known you're getting numbers from us, they're not gonna work. Me personally, as an engineer, I would rather not sell a number than sell a number and then have a customer complain. The salespeople disagree. They win, they're the ones bringing in the money, but I at least try to have a disclaimer and let them know. And you have the more established carriers, like the aggregators like Voxbone, where you'll see where Voxbone won't have a number where you would think everybody else has numbers, but then when you get the numbers from the other people, not a plug for them, but they've been so far pretty good where they, I think only once or twice had a problem where numbers got pulled and stopped working because some kind of local, I guess, they had some kind of disagreement, but for the most part, they only work with established carriers, where other providers will work with both established carriers and sometimes will work with not so established carriers. Choose wisely, because like I said, unlike termination where you could go ahead and decide to switch your provider if you're having a problem, when you get a phone number from a particular provider, you're married to them. If they go down, you go down. And it's a very unpleasant conversation. I've had a few of these with customers saying, I know you have a number, I know you're doing a lot of traffic, I really like your business, but I'm sorry, my carrier just decided to fall apart and is no longer working. Solutions, I alluded to this. When it comes to international, have a wide variety of options. Try to have as many carriers as possible en route. Local carriers, a lot of time, will actually work very, very well. They may be more expensive because they're heavily regulated in what they could charge. And the way the bigger carriers get cheaper is because they have bilats, so they devalue the price of their minute, so they're able to lower their rates. We had a problem to South Africa where everybody was having quality issues. It is pretty far down. There's not a lot of good internet as of yet going in there. And we found one local carrier that worked very well, double the rate. Salespeople fought with us, changed the route. The ACD went down and they ended up going back into route. So the smaller carriers, they ended up working well. The smaller carriers sometimes will help you out. Sometimes the tier one, when they have a good route, they're good, but always have a backup. Like I said, search for local providers. For termination, the more the better. Do your homework, look at reviews. Use something like VoIP Monitor to constantly monitor your network. And last but not least, constantly test. There's a company out there called iTest, i-test.net, sorry. And they have a platform where they have GSM gateways all around the world. And the way they work is they'll send you a call with a particular caller ID. It'll go out for your providers. It'll go to their GSM gateway, so they're controlling both points. They're controlling the phone number being called. They're controlling sending the number. And if they detect false answer supervision, if they detect bad caller ID, if they detect bad quality, or anything like that, they'll let you know. So don't ever get comfortable, keep testing and keep working on your network. And I think I'm out of time. Any questions real quick? All right, yeah.
You never mentioned pre or post-pay. That's one of my big things.
You're always going to be prepaid with carriers until you build a relationship with them. Because there's so much fraud, because there's so many companies that like install a switch and think, yeah, I could be your provider. So I didn't even bring it up because even we've been around for 10 years and most of the companies we work with, it's prepaid. Unless you really have a good relationship with them, it's going to be, unfortunately, it's going to be prepaid.
I don't think
What?
I don't think post-pay.
We'll speak to you afterwards. All right, yes. Running reports and looking at calls. If I go ahead and I send them through VoIP Monitor, if I go ahead and I send them a call and I'm noticing to a specific country or to a specific prefix, that magically all the calls are getting answered right away, that doesn't look right. Some calls will go ahead, I'm getting the signal to hurry up, but some calls will, I'm not, okay, never mind then. Some calls will automatically get answered, and then you always have your customers that will go ahead and let you know if they're calling and they're yelling, there's nobody there. Yeah, we do have reports. We'll go ahead and we'll look and we'll see that if all of a sudden the answer is literally every single time within 2 seconds of me sending them a call, it's never going to be to a specific carrier because the tier ones, those games they will not play, but everybody underneath them, whoever they're using, will. So if I see all of a sudden that all the calls are being answered right away to a specific country, chances are there's somebody playing games. And then otherwise, unfortunately, you do get it from your customers. They will open up tickets and they will bother you about it. All right, thank you very much.